Hello, welcome back again, ladies and gentlemen, to The View from Here, Behind Enemy Lines. We have a guest today by the name of Ken Good. He's on the board of directors of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. Ken graduated from Hardin-Simmons University in 1982 with a Bachelor of Arts degree. He's got a Master in Education he earned in 1986 from Tarleton State University, part of the Texas A&M system. In 1989, he received a law degree from Texas High School of Law, where he was a member of the Texas Tech Law Review. Mr. Good has argued cases before the Supreme Court of Texas and Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, and along with numerous Court of Appeals, including the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. He's the author of Goods on Bail, a practice guide created for bail industry professionals. And in addition, he's written numerous articles on the subject of bail reform, including What Successful Bail Reform Looks Like. Mr. Good is married, and he's the father of two daughters. Ken, take it away. What are you here to talk to us about? I understand it's cash bail, right?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I didn't realize how old I was until you start pointing out I graduated from college in '82, and that was after 3 years. So I graduated a year early. So I really am old. My wife likes to point that out to me every day since I'm 10 years older than her, and she keeps saying, when you were a senior in high school, I was a first grader. So yeah, it's always fun.
Well, I graduated high school.
I think one of the things What? Tell me again.
I graduated high school.
What year did you graduate from high school?
7 years ago. So
yeah, and
57.
I must be much younger than you because I've never graduated from high school.
Well, I graduated from high school in '79. I've been an attorney for over 35 years now, so I feel like I'm catching up with you, Roy.
Oh,
one of the things I want to talk to y'all about is the president's executive order encouraging that we get rid of cashless bail. And I would even just start with, the reason why I think that the president is coming up with this executive order is because there's nothing that compares to the private surety bail system. I mean, nobody's a champion for that. Nobody advocates for it. The reason why it's been around for 200 years is because it does one thing. It does it very well, and it does it better than any other release mechanism. And because of that, there's nothing that will compete. And so all these bail reform measures that we've been doing for the last few years are really just experiments that have made our criminal justice system worse. And the way they make them worse is the failure to appear rate. So if your failure to appear rate is, less than 10%, which is the private industry, and then everything else we try is 50%, 75%, 80%, I mean, you can tell very quickly that since our criminal justice system cannot go forward without the defendant being present, all these cases get put on hold. That's going to create bigger and bigger backlogs. And as backlogs, sorry.
And it also creates a system where
as
people
backlogs
who should be
as backlogs grow, then there's a pressure to dismiss cases. Go ahead.
It also creates an atmosphere where people like, what was his name, DeCarlo Brown, I think it was, killed Irina Zarutska on the bus. He should have been behind bars. At best, he should have been in a mental institution, but we've done away with those, unfortunately, because of.
I do agree. He had a long history of mental health issues, and the problem with him, or the problem in general, is we've kind of moved the treatment for mental health issues into our prison systems, our jails. Some of our largest mental health facilities in states are the jails or the prison system. And so with these criminal justice reforms, we've been doing a King's X. We don't want them in the criminal justice system anymore. And so we're just dismissing their criminal cases to get them out. But then there's nowhere else, like you pointed out, there's nowhere else for them to go. And so it becomes a revolving door, our jails. So they come in, they get arrested, they get on their medications, they get controllable, they get released, they get off their medications, they get uncontrollable, and then they get in trouble again. And so our current system is just a revolving door, and we just keep dismissing their cases until they commit a substantial or serious enough case that we're not going to let them go. They still have the same mental issue they had before, but now the crime is so bad that we can't release them, and that's the problem.
Aren't the judges' hands tied to some extent because the legislation insists that they have to let them go under certain circumstances that, under their own personal judgment, they would not pursue?
I think that is part of the problem of the criminal justice reform movement and the bail reform movement that we've seen, because what they're doing is they're tying the hands of judges. So, they'll pass a statute that has a long list of crimes that says, if you're arrested for this crime, the judge has no discretion. He has to release you on simple release, which is just your promise that you're going to come back. And so when they get arrested like that, the problem is it just creates, our gangs, our organized crime, our career criminals figure out ways to make millions of dollars out of those loopholes, because no matter how many times you're arrested for that, you get released on the same. It's kind of a cookie cutter release system. We want to treat everybody the same. And the problem is our criminal justice system was not intended to treat everybody the same. It was created to put just the amount of pressure needed to make you become a good citizen. And, the amount of pressure for you versus the amount of pressure for me might be completely different.
Well, this exercise in equity actually allows dimwits to control things because they don't have to make any real decisions. All they have to do is know what is the decision that's been made for them.
Yes. And, I read something just recently that said institutionalized equity is really just institutionalized affirmative action. We're going to treat a couple of races better than any others, or we're going to treat one race worse than everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to say, if you are treating one race one way, reverse it and say, I'm treating the other race this way. And if you then come to the conclusion that that's improper, well, then it was improper to begin with.
It could also be that treat one political ideology one way and treat another way. So the old blind justice seems to be getting poked in the back every time when somebody's coming along.
Well, I do think that we're kind of entering a period where we are more we're treating the supporters of one party better in the next term. Whichever party's in control. You can see that with when Trump was elected, and then when he was defeated, with the reaction to January 6th, and then when he was reelected to 2.0, he pardoned all of them. And so, I could see where the same thing would happen if the Democrats pick up the presidential offices in the next national election. There could be some pardons for criminals who are now being convicted for the way they were treating ICE agents. So, there's reports in the news today about convictions starting to happen across the country for harassing ICE agents. So I could see a president come in and from the opposite party then come in and start pardoning them, saying it was all political. And that's a really bad thing for our country. And so I hope that does not happen.
Also very concerning is what Susan Rice has stated, that once they get back into power, the Democrats, there's going to be payback. They are plotting revenge already.
Yeah, but I think that's part of the I think that is part of a game plan of discouraging good candidates from running for the opposite side. And you can see that historically, where they try to run off good candidates. And so I think there's an element of that in play, where they're saying, we will come after you, and we'll come after you and your family, and we'll make it personal if you run as a Republican. That's really one of the things she's saying.
Isn't the real reform for bail really the exercising of what was always being exercised? Bring it back to where it was instead of creating new laws and legislation?
Yes, I would say the answer is to give more discretion to judges, not take away discretion. And that's the point. The reason why they called it bail reform, they call it, this, we want to treat everybody the same, is because they want to take away discretion from judges. Because they really, we don't have low-level people stuck in jail like they keep saying. The reality is they want they want to decrease the jail population so they can shift that money over to social programs. And to do that, they're okay if there's additional crime. I mean, you see it all the time. The activist groups will release reports and they'll say, well, we released 15% more people from the jail into the population. And so on a proportionate basis, so 15% of more people, criminals are being released, you're going to have 15% more crime. But they'll say on a proportionate basis, the crime stayed the same. Yes, it increased proportionately to the number of criminals released, but they'll argue, well, it didn't increase on a proportional basis. So crime did not increase. And it's just cooking the books with numbers, not being honest to the public.
Yeah, because if they were honest, the other way, if you keep them locked up, then crime will decrease. Even though same amount of the same number of people are committing the same number, committing the crimes.
Well, we know that there's a large number of crimes that are being committed by the same small group of people. Like 50, 60% of crimes are being committed by, what I would say is the crime city living within the city. The problem we have with all these bail reforms is, for the gray area, the groups of people that live between the two cities, they're watching what the criminal justice system is doing, and they're basing their decisions on whether to live within the crime city or the law and order part of the city based upon what the criminal justice system is doing. And if they're dismissing cases, then criminals see that as a green light to commit more crime. And the gray area, the citizens living between the two say, okay, well, I'm going to commit crime now because no one's being held accountable. And so I do think crime, we know how to fight crime. We know how to decrease crime. We have a large amount of crime being committed by the same small group of people. And so we just need to address that. Bail reform is intended, or one of the impacts of it is to tie the hands of the judges so they can't do that for whatever reason.
This jogged my memory, and this is going out on a limb here, Ken, so be kind to me, okay? Dr. Spock, who was a child behaviorist, was famous in the, I think, 60s and 70s, and he was against corporal punishment for children. For very nice reasons. But the fact of the matter is that when you have an individual, regardless of their age, that is incapable of processing the rationale as to why you should behave in a certain way, then a different stimulus might be necessary. And the thing is that what's happened is, I think, is that people have gone into kindness mode to the point where they have no consideration for the victims and the future victims, for the literally for the citizenry of the area. So I see those two things as kind of related.
Well, I would agree to the standpoint of we took away all accountability. And really what you said really reminded me. I mean, my oldest daughter is 27 and she's fixing to get married in June. My wife and I probably had one of our first worst fights we ever had when we were pregnant with her. And it was over this very issue. We had a fight over what kind of discipline we were going to use, supposedly in the future when she was born. And my wife was like, we're not going to use corporal punishment. And I'm like, I'm not taking anything off the table until I figure out what works with this little child. And so I want to know what works. If corporal punishment is the only thing that is going to work with her because she's pig-headed like me, then I think we have to keep that on the table. But I think the bigger point is when you take all accountability off the table, which a lot of parents do when they, when you say you can't punish them, you only can be positive. Well, then it's really the whole concept of no accountability, which is also the problem in criminal justice reform, bail reform. We can no longer hold anybody accountable. And so what do they do with that? They see that as a green light to commit more crime.
Right. And also it motivates them because they get the thrill of having beaten the system. So they're getting, not only are they getting past the laws and regulations and the stupidity of the regular guy, but they're also lording over him, a form of dominance.
Well, and I would say we know that's true because we've committed this same mistake in the 60s where we felt very safe and became more forgiving on our criminal laws. And so as a result, more people were released from jail and we started having crime go up. And then we had a backlash because the national parties would not agree on how to address it. And as a result, we got a backlash and Reagan was elected. And one of the reasons why he was elected was because of his war on drugs. And so I think we're seeing the same thing happen with Trump 2.0. I think two of the reasons why he was elected was crime, the soft on crime policies, but also the immigration policies, which are hand in hand with the soft on crime policies. No accountability. You want to come here illegally. We're an accepting country, even if you're from a prison in your other country. I mean, in fact, for a while and currently still, we're in areas of our country, we're elevating criminals from other countries above our own country's citizens.
Yes.
I mean, look at what happened in Illinois just recently with the college student who was killed. And, the governor said, he's giving lip service to, we need to prosecute this person to the full extent of the law. But I mean, this is the same governor who was taking selfies on that same location saying how safe they were, and he ends up having a student killed by an illegal immigrant who was here improperly, and he can't even say that because his activist party will punish him and not support him if he does.
Castro was one of the first to dump undesirables on us when there was this movement for Cubans to escape and come to the United States. Certain states opened them with open arms, and he goes, "Well, I'm dumping my prisons." And so the thing is, that was already a behavior that was established by Castro quite some time ago, and you would think that we would be aware of it, at least those people in charge, but we're dealing with...
the problem is I think they were aware of it. I think they're absolutely aware of it, but they figured out also that if they flooded their state with illegal aliens, they would get larger representation in the House of Representatives no matter what, and they would do that no matter what the cost or harm was to the rest of their citizens. So I think that when they figure out that they are going to lose elections or lose representation in the House of Representatives unless they do those things, I think it becomes, who are you representing then? Are the Democrats putting party over country? And I think clearly some of them are. Same thing with criminal justice reform. Go ahead.
One of the examples of no accountability with disciplining children I saw yesterday, I watched a video of this kid who was probably about 12, maybe 13 years old, tops, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs at this man who wasn't that big, but he was bigger than the kid, and he was an adult. And the kid is trying to block him and presses against him, trying to keep him from walking to where he wanted to walk. And then the guy got on the phone, was talking to, I don't know who he was talking to. And the kid is just, keep circling him. And finally, as the guy goes into a building to tell the owner of the business there to get rid of this kid because he was harassing him, the kid punches him several times. And the first 3 times, the guy goes, ooh, like, yo, you're really hurting me, making fun of him. But finally, the kid tries to hit his face. So the guy comes, grabs him by the neck, takes him around the corner, throws him to the pavement. The kid started screaming like bloody murder. And then he's trying to say, he was strangling me, he was choking me, and he threw me down on the floor. And people were telling him, we saw what you did. And he got up and he's screaming at this lady, and cursing at her and so forth, and calling her a whore and so forth. And no accountability. This kid was never told no. This kid really deserves corporal punishment. Okay, he's going to grow up to be a problem, and he may wind up killing somebody.
Well, I agree that he's going to grow up and be a problem, and it's a lack of accountability. And it may be a lack of corporal punishment, but it may not be. Because, the problem that we have with our a generation of kids is if you're not going to what do you use to hold them accountable? Timeout can be effective for some kids, and depriving them of their favorite toy. I mean, you just have to find out what works. I mean, I was a big fan of find out what works, ride that pony until it didn't work anymore, and then you're on the search for the next thing to what works. I mean, we're telling all these corporal punishment stories. So our oldest daughter, who's 27, when she was young, when she was a little kid, but she was old enough to have a little Walkman, when there was such things. I mean, she got in trouble, and so I was going to teach this life lesson that I thought I was so smart, and so I gave her a choice between a spanking or she was going to lose her Walkman for a couple of days. Well, she picked spanking right away. And so I'm like, well, okay, so you picked it. And so we went upstairs and I gave her spanking. She started crying. I started crying. And so she's like, well, why are you crying? You're the one that gave me the spanking. I said, dads do not like to give spankings. And I mean, about an hour later, she came up to me and she's like, here's my Walkman. I've changed my mind. I want to give up my Walkman.
Wow.
And I'm like, there's no takebacks on spankings, but that's probably the only spanking I ever remember giving to her. And we both ended up crying. But it's that accountability element. You got to find what works with a kid. I mean, I have a nephew that if you'd have spanked him, he would have dug his heels in. That would have just made him more belligerent. So, I mean, I'm a big fan on what works, and what works for one kid is not going to work for another. Well, the criminal justice system's the same thing. We are supposed to, we gave judges enough discretion so that they could figure out what worked for that person. Now we're taking it all away and we're requiring them to treat everybody the same on the type of release. And we're doing simple release, which just is not working. And it's become a fiasco.
We need to bring mental institutions back. That's all there is to it, because there's this halfway point between criminal and just crazy. And if crazy is walking around the street long enough, it's going to go crazy again. And the thing is that there was some bad experiences with some of our institutions, many of our institutions. So they made them go away. Now, those people that are mentally disabled are walking the streets. But also,
look, if we could find a solution for the mental health problem in the United States, I mean, all three of us would be billionaires. The problem is the first problem is there's no natural constituency for mental health. I mean, that's the reason why the mental health facilities really went away. Anytime there was a budget crisis in a county, that's the first place they'd cut budgets. And so one of the next reason why they went away is because there were class action lawsuits filed across the country because they didn't have enough funds to provide basic needs in their mental health facilities. And so Trump has said he's open to them returning, but the problem is we would have the same exact problem now as we had then. We don't have a natural constituency to support them. We would have a funding problem, and it's probably a bigger funding problem now because it's expensive to run a mental health facility. And then the last thing I would say on the mental health issue is our criminals have really learned how to game the system claiming mental health, because our counselors are taught you take everything they say as for granted, you support them, you don't contradict what they say. And so if a criminal finds out that you're going to dismiss their criminal case if they say they have a mental health problem, well, then, the career criminals are going to come in and say they have a mental health problem. And nobody's going to contradict them because the counselors are taught to support what they say and take it at face value and believe it, to be supportive. So who's going to triage that and say, we don't believe that? And so we have to overcome that systemic problem, and we have to figure out a way to triage mental health. And like you said, it's a big problem, but that's not the only problem. I mean, when we have a criminal justice system, bail reform system, where we're telling people, if you don't come, your case is going to be put on hold. And then we're going to put on top of that a deadline for the criminal case to be resolved. The criminals figure out what they got to do, just stay gone for a while. And then the trial court's going to have to dismiss their misdemeanor case. That's the way it happens in California all the time.
Yeah, but in California, that's a political thing, because they are political appointees who are doing the bidding of the governors or mayors who appointed them.
Well, but they've also enacted a Speedy Trial Act. And so in misdemeanors, I mean, I did a podcast with a DA from California. He said they do simple release for all misdemeanors and they have an 80% failure to appear rate. And you can't extradite them across county lines. You can't force them to come back. And so, and with the Speedy Trial Act requirements, if they're gone a certain amount of time, then their case gets dismissed. Why would criminals see that as anything else but we're going to commit more crime and not have any consequence?
In regards to the mental institutions and their expense, if we can eliminate the vast amount of fraud that is taking place throughout the states for various reasons, such as hospice, I understand 30% of all the hospice industry companies are in Los Angeles, which means a lot of people are either dying or a lot of cheating is going on. So there's a lot of corruption that's being exposed, and if we could at least transfer some of that those funds to something wholesome, that works. Now, I mean, the thing is,
you know what? I'm going to come out against that. There is so much fraud in every level of the government at this point. Mm-hmm. I mean, you set up a program that's going to help people. All it's going to do is line people's pockets at this point, especially on each end of the coast. So, I mean, I probably would just say I'm against anything like that because it's not going to work. The bureaucracy that's going to be set up is going to suck up all the money. I mean, I saw something this morning talking about New York spends on average over $80,000 a year per homeless person. And the homelessness situation in New York has not improved. Now I promise you, if you gave me $80,000, I would be better off next year. But we're spending over 80,000 per homeless person with no improvement of situation. That means we're setting up a bureaucracy to monitor and do nothing other than get paid large sums of money. It's to not help people.
Well, during the 70s and 80s, the welfare system was designed to keep males out of the household, and the more children you had, the more welfare you made. So you have these households full of children and no male to actually balance the home. Yeah. So yeah, we've been doing it wrong for a while too. So shame on you for disagreeing with me on that last one, Ken. I'm gonna figure it out.
But think about this: if we had another pandemic today, like COVID-19, would we react any differently than we did how many years ago?
Yes, we would.
I think most people would.
You think so? I think the Democrats would be pushing for the exact same reaction. I think that there are some, but I think they would be on the minority. I would be against closing down our country at all and I would also be pushing for herd immunity. I mean, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when we have a pandemic that looks like it's completely manufactured to target just the elderly, I mean, why would you close schools? And why would you do anything except for protect the elderly?
Well, we still have maskaholics walking around the streets, still wearing those masks that do nothing for viruses, because a virus looks at that and looks like a chain link fence for that virus, man.
Well, I'm trying to get a better attitude because I agree with you completely on that. And I will note I agreed with you. But sometimes people are wearing masks to protect themselves because they have respiratory diseases or asthma. And so I'm trying to be more positive that they're wearing it to protect themselves, not to protect others, maybe, because I agree with you. I mean, for a while, every time I saw somebody wearing a mask, I wanted to go up to them and say, the most recent studies say that this is absolutely no benefit at all. But they may be wearing it for their own safety.
Well, it is a sign of control from the COVID days. It's Definitely. Also a sign of compliance, which is the same thing. But I think it's also a sign that they're doing the right thing, and that whole virtue signaling thing. Yeah. So there's that. But I think some people are just dead on scared. They're scared to death. And they haven't stopped being scared. And those are the people that need need some therapy. So
Well,
let's.
I would even point out, though, that our government really failed the public, because we should be able to lean on the government. And so, what did the government tell us? Well, we need to empty the jails because it's not safe for them. I mean, even though we were learning that it was not safe for elderly, but they used that as an excuse to empty out the jails, kind of like what you just said about Cuba and Venezuela. Venezuela would be a country that emptied the jails, and so shock of all shocks, crime went up when you emptied the jails, and we suffered the consequences for it.
And
I think there was an overreaction, but I think there would be again today.
They made hydrochloroquine basically illegal for doctors to use. They put so much pressure on doctors, and the test procedures were not at all correct. They were desperately searching for any minuscule piece of evidence that might imply COVID. So there was just, the medical profession failed us, as well as the government, because the medical profession went along. There are certain institutions that should be sacred, and medicine should be one of them, as well as the law, I might say. In regards to the judges, if you're not there, and if you're not in some sort of holy of holies space to try to discern what is justice, that's my kid's view of.
Well, there's so many similarities between the government's reaction to COVID and also the government's reaction on a lot of levels on the criminal justice reform, because we know how to fight crime, we know how to reduce crime, but there's activist groups that put out these pseudo studies, and they're very well funded, they're very well organized, and the best example I can give you is this whole defund the police movement. Okay, so you've got activists issuing these pseudo reports saying we'll be safer if we defund the police. Then we've got science from universities saying that if you defund the police or decrease funding for the police, the first thing that's going to go up is your murder rate, and crime is going to go up astronomically. And we have examples of that during the CHOP zone in Seattle. And there was a study of the impact on cordoning off a little area where the police would not go and for like 30 days, and crime increased 75%. And then in the 2-block area around it, by 50%. And then the whole precinct, 25%. And when police didn't go there, they didn't do their jobs. The local businesses sued the government and got millions of dollars. And then when somebody was killed, that family sued the government for not doing their job and got tens of millions of dollars. So when you think we're going to be safer, the answer is no. And if you're not going to do your job of policing and keeping the public safe, there's going to be real world consequences if you don't.
What can the regular guy do to present, let's say if they're in court and they've been assaulted or whatever, and what can the regular guy do to make it less easy or more difficult for the courts to go ahead and let these people skate?
Well, okay, so the good news is that you're starting to see a lot of rollback of these policies. So New York has rolled back their bail reforms 3 times, and it's a big issue in the current election in New York. Even as bad as California is, they had a statewide referendum on whether they wanted these types of simple release, and it was rejected by the voters. And then they're still trying to push it through by county against what the voters wanted. And so I think the best advice I could give is that historically, both of our national parties have been law and order parties. And we need one more national election where we vote law and order. And so we reject the activists on the left candidates, and we vote for strong law and order candidates. One more national election, and then I think the parties will reset, and both of them will become law and order, just like they did in the 60s and 70s. So I think the best thing you can do is vote law and order candidates for the next national election.
Well, another result of defunding police would be you would get eventually a rise in vigilantism, because people are going to have to defend themselves.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. We've had examples of that in New York, on the subway where the ex-Marine, stepped in to help somebody or help a situation, and he held him, and then the guy died. And so he ended up getting prosecuted and found not guilty. But that whole reason why he was prosecuted, in my opinion, was because the DA saw it as a vigilante response to more crime. And so they were trying to stop that from happening more.
I think it's more
isn't that
insidious than
really
that. I think they don't want us to defend ourselves. This is why they're so
Yes, they
against the
don't.
Second Amendment. They don't. They want us to rely on them. However, the Supreme Court has ruled in the past that police are not obligated to protect you. They're there to pick up
Right.
the pieces afterwards and figure out who did the crime and apprehend. But they don't have to go and defend you if you're being attacked, which doesn't make sense.
And that's one of the things
well,
that's right. And that's one of the things I argue is if you're, at the very least, if you're not going to allow me, if you're not going to protect me, allow me the ability to defend myself. And I think in New York, I think the DA does not want that to happen.
No.
I would say that
New York, New
vigilantism is not the same thing as being a good Samaritan. Being a good Samaritan is you're at the moment, you're not looking for trouble, and there is need, whether it's taking a dog out of a rushing river, or whether, in other words, it's somebody putting their skin in the game in order to go ahead and help somebody or something out. Whereas vigilantism to me is guys who think that they're Batman and they're going to go out and they're searching for somebody to
but I think vigilante justice in this age of crime increasing, I think it's, you have a void. And so someone will step into that void. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm very hopeful. I think that this criminal justice reform movement is not sustainable, because increasing crime is not, the public won't stand for that. And so I do think that I have lots of hope on that because of that reason.
Would you consider the guardian angels of New York City? Would you consider the guardian angels of New York City vigilantes then?
I think that I think the DA in New York would consider them, if they're using themselves as an alternative to police when the police will not do their job, I think they would be viewed locally by the political apparatus as vigilantes. Whether the public would see them as that, but I mean, as crime increases, the public will support vigilantes. That's the reason why it's not sustainable.
Yeah, but the guardian angels don't carry weapons, and they don't hang people when they catch them committing a crime. They turn them over to the authorities.
But you remember, our criminal laws are there to protect the criminal when they commit a crime, to give them due process, to give them their rights under the Constitution. So, criminal laws are there to protect the defendants. If we're not going to enforce our criminal laws, then they're the ones that are going to end up ultimately suffering the consequences, because we will have vigilante justice imposed upon them.
Isn't there such a thing as natural law in regards to that just being a living being, you have certain behaviors that you have the right to perform? Now, I'm keeping God out of this, but the fact of the matter is you have the right to defend yourself, regardless of what the law of the land is. And the thing
that's, depends on where you live. But I will say there are natural laws, and, I mean, it's, we could get into the weeds and talk about philosophers and, the biblical religious philosophy is one of those. But, I think that you could start with our basic philosophy is when two people come together, there's usually a fight to get whichever one's power for the other. The reason why we've come together as society is we have decided to compromise this ongoing fight for each other's power, and we've compromised for public safety. And so if the local government is not going to give us public safety, then the natural rights thing, I think, raises their ugly heads, because then we come into a fight over power, over whose idea of public safety is going to arise. And that's another reason why I just don't think it's sustainable. The public will not stand for more crime.
The problem with that is that what are the flags? What are the signs that we're going to say constitute a true observation of that state? So the thing is like, is this person acting prematurely? Is the state actually doing their job? Or just, this guy's just jumping the gun? Or have they actually reached the point where there is an actual problem?
But isn't that the whole point? When you don't enforce your laws, then you get into people start doing their own enforcement of the law. And then as that increases, which is the reason why I think that DA in New York stepped in and prosecuted the Good Samaritan, is to try to make sure no more vigilante, because if you have a rise in vigilante justice, then you ultimately have chaos, and chaos is, nobody wants chaos.
Well, actually, I disagree with you on that.
Didn't create chaos when they came out in the 70s or 80s, whatever it was, in the 80s, I believe, when they started patrolling the streets of New York and the subways. They did not create chaos. They were, I can understand being afraid of what was his name, Bernard Goetz on the subway. Okay, which I think he was justified in defending himself. He was not justified in shooting the kid a second time, saying you look like you could use another one.
Look, he was found not guilty, though. But I think, there's a big difference between the two groups. I mean, you look in the 70s and the 80s for the guardian angels, they were servicing a community that did not feel safe, and they looked like that community. And so they relied upon them. They trusted them. I mean, one of my big criticisms of this criminal justice reform is they're using these same old attacks to fight the system. But the problem is, when your judge is the same minority as the defendant, the sheriff's office in the courtroom is the same minority. The prosecutor is the same minority as the defendant. How can you say you have systemic racism when everybody is in the courtroom is the same race as the defendant? I just absolutely reject that we have a systemic racism problem. I think we have a problem of a disproportionate amount of crime with certain races, and that's what gets people in trouble when they say that.
We're living in a society where people don't know what your sexual nature is, where people actually declare themselves as cats, and you want people to actually know what race they are. I identify as a Martian. Yeah, and I want my pronouns to be bleep up bleep.
We're all three men. So can you imagine if we were teenagers today and we saw somebody that we thought was hot, and so they turned out to not be the sexual orientation we thought they were, and today you would be considered all kinds of bad if you weren't willing to ask that person out. I mean, I don't even know how you navigate that stuff today. I mean, thank goodness we don't have to do that. And thank God I have a wife who allows me to still stay in the same house with her.
Well, I hang around with a lot of young people because I'm a game designer. I design board games, and there is quite the reverse, I think. People tend to really use a tremendous amount of foul language and implied sexual actions. But I don't think anybody is actually doing the horizontal mambo. I think they're just talking about it.
Well, when we were kids, I mean, I think this is correct. You tell me if I'm wrong, but when we were kids, when you're just in a room full of guys, you're all making jokes that everybody's gay. And I'm like, well, what do we make jokes about nowadays when we're in a room full of guys? If you can't make that joke anymore, what is the go-to joke? And I have a feeling it's still the same thing. I just don't know. I'll never find out because I'm just an old fart now. But how do kids be kids today? Because, the jokes we made when we were kids were inappropriate. And so the jokes they're making today are still inappropriate. But what are they? We don't know.
They're very younger people. I'm talking about 40 and under, who, if I make a certain joke, they'll say, oh, you can't say that, or you shouldn't say that, or that's mean. Or what. Come on. Humor is humor. And somebody famous once said that a tragedy for one person is the source of humor for someone else watching. As long as somebody doesn't, if somebody trips and people will laugh. If somebody who's old trips and gets hurt, then people are concerned.
Well, that's
I just want to say, stiffen up your back. I mean, there was a lot of things growing up with that people said to me that were very, very cruel. And you know what? I didn't die. I didn't lose faith. I didn't just crawl into a hole. You just kept going. And so a lot of today is kind of like everybody gets a participation trophy. We can't have a true winner. We can't have a true loser. And I kind of think you got to be a loser so you can learn what you got to do so you can become a winner tomorrow. And we've taken that way from a generation because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings has now gotten to the point where we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings in the criminal justice system because we don't want to have accountability. And if we can't have accountability there, well, then we're going to have crime. And so
we do have a systemic problem, and that is that we have stopped teaching our children to have moral compasses. We have stopped teaching. We have not put spiritual teachings into their lives sufficiently that they have some sort of axiom to work with that promotes personal growth morality. And also decency, morality. Yeah, I'm funny with the word, but anyway, the thing is that.
And I agree with that to a certain extent, but what's wrong with just teaching, hey, what would grandma do? I mean, when I was a young Christian, I couldn't say, what would Jesus do? I would say, what would grandma do? Because she was the most religious person I knew. And so for a long time, I just said, what would grandma do? And we're not teaching kids today to even say that. I mean, there's no since there's no consequences, no accountability, you can do whatever you want and you can get away with it.
And also the thing is that the lack of humility in the average person doesn't help either, in that they don't have a higher power. They don't have a higher purpose. And the thing is, an individual who has nothing that they would be willing to, and this is going to sound crazy, nothing they're willing to die for is I think a poor life. It's a life that it's not of service. It's not a life of service. And you need that in order to have an ethical compass. And right now, our kids, our younger people, have been broken down to believe in nothing. They're nihilists. And because they're nihilists, they don't have any sense of oh man, I got lost in this, but you get the idea.
No sense of right or wrong.
Well, not just right or wrong, but
it's a
just
society of sociopaths.
Yeah.
Well, I did read something recently about have we raised a generation of narcissists. And that's really not current kids, that's the parents before them. So, I mean, it's kind of like our generation. Are we a generation of narcissists? And I'm not really sure what the answer to that is, but we are seeing a large number of kids, reject their parents and, almost cut off contact with them. And I think part of that is, I know what's right. And, I've never been able to see you as an adult. And that's been one of the things that I've really worked hard with my daughter. She's 20. My oldest is 27. My youngest is 21. She's in college. She's on her junior year. And, there's a point where you got to see them as adults versus kids. When they're kids, my daughter came to me and said, why can't you be like my best friend's parents? And they want to be your best friend. And I'm like, oh, you've got it sad, because I'm not even shooting for best friend. I'm shooting for parent. But at some point, you've got to then switch gears and be the supportive, loving, giving advice person instead of still trying to dictate to them what's right and wrong and what they should do and shouldn't do. Because at some point they got to figure it out on their own. And if they don't, if they fail, then there's consequences. The issue we have, I think, is still no consequences. We're wanting to get through life without consequences. And that is a life.
You have to try and impart wisdom as opposed to discipline at a certain point, And
it's really hard when we have today where we have two choices, and one's, we would look at it as clearly a clear choice, and today's kids do not see it as a clear choice. One's a moral decision, the other one is an economic decision. And so I don't know how we teach that where we are, but let's look at Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a universally looked program that is successful. It has a higher being element. It doesn't say what's the higher being, but somehow the Alcoholics Anonymous has navigated the political spectrum, and everybody agrees it's successful. So we need to figure out what they did right, and we need to put that higher being element into our criminal justice system for more success. I mean, if we go back to the 60s, the reason why we had this push for more law and order is it came from our inner cities, and it came from the black preachers who saw the damage that was being done to their young black males in their community. So they're the ones that said, we've got to do something. Same thing's happening today. I mean, the same thing is happening today. It's our urban cities that are areas where they're pushing for reform. When you've got the NAACP inside of a large city saying we need an emergency order on crime, well, I mean, what crime do you think is being committed? It's being committed by the same minority on the minority. So when crime is increasing, it's disproportionately hurting our minorities more than it is the rest of the country. And so that's what's being lost. So these reforms that they say they're helping are actually doing the opposite. And that's why we know it's too much politics. We got to get as much politics as we can out of the issue and look and see what works and what doesn't.
And most of those families that generate that stuff are lacking a father.
And despite the false rise of racism, when you say, "Oh, this minority is committing the disproportionate amount of crimes," they are committing crimes mainly against their own kind.
Mm-hmm. Yes, their own race. And I did a podcast with the sheriff of Tarrant County in Texas, and he said that the inmates in the Tarrant County jail shared three things. Number one, they didn't have a college education. I mean, high school education. So they didn't have a degree. They didn't have a father figure, and they had either mental health issues or drug issues. So no high school degree, no father, and they had some kind of outside influence, either drugs or mental health issues.
Okay, that makes sense. And, one goes with the other, because if you're going to be with a bunch of bad boys, you're going to do bad things in order to get along. You need to create the so-called rep that you're this wild man. And
and our job is to teach our kids so when they get in that situation, they go, "Oh, I'm not comfortable with this. I need to walk away." But the problem is that's the hardest thing to teach your kids. And it's the hardest thing for them to learn, not only in society, but when they get into the criminal justice system, when they get into those bad elements, where is their governor that says, "No, I can't do this and I have to walk away"? That's what's missing.
Jordan Peterson says something, and this might be straying from the main point, that a man has to be dangerous. Not that he causes all kinds of trouble, but he has to have the capacity to be able to be dangerous in order to go ahead and be fully developed. Well, yeah, whatever it takes. In other words, he's got to be capable and dangerous. And the thing is that you have somebody like that who's in a family that he can protect. All of a sudden, a lot of the criminal elements are in the area going to go, I'm going to go for a softer target, because that's natural.
Well, there's a lot of data out there that shows that if I'm charged with murder, that's not my first charge. I have 7 or 8 previous charges, and I'll have a criminal history. So why are we waiting until they commit a really bad crime to hold them accountable? I think that's a really good, what Jordan Peterson said. I think there's a lot of data to back that up. So, if they've got a propensity to commit murder, there's a lot of telltale signs of it in the criminal justice system before they get to that point.
Shoot.
Yeah, that's true. And it also reminds me of what you said earlier about they thought that the jails were dangerous, and they're dangerous because of the element that's in the jails. So these politicians decide, let's release them into society. So instead of endangering others like themselves, they're endangering everyone in general. Doesn't make sense.
Did the podcast seize up? Because it did on my end.
No.
Oh, it didn't on my end.
A problem. No. I'm just saying, we might be having the same problem that we had before. So just to avoid trouble, it might be a good time to just call it the quits, especially since I can't agree with Ken on anything.
We can't agree on the color of the sky, so this is a good place to end. It's red, didn't you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're right. It is red. Oh, that's something we can agree upon.
Yes,
in the morning and at night.
The whole country is red as far as I'm concerned.
Do you have anything else that you'd like to say about it, or you think you've presented your case?
I would say if people want more information about my group, they can go to pbtx.com, pbtx.com. We have a blog where we highlight important criminal justice stories. We also have our own podcast. There's a link on the menu, but you can go directly to thebellpost.com. And all we talk about is criminal justice issues, what works, what doesn't work. And so if you want to know what defunding the police will do, we have an episode on it. If you want to know what the New Jersey plan is, we have an episode on it. So I invite people to find out more information on these criminal justice issues, because you're not going to find out the truth from the mainstream media. You're going to find out what the activist groups are spitting out, and it's all hogwash.
Right. That's true.
Stick around.
Anyway, well, I hope everyone enjoyed this very instructive, very informative talk with Ken Good, attorney down in Texas, and a professional bail bondsman. Okay. How's business these days without bail, by the way?
Well, I mean, I'm not a bondsman. I'm an attorney for bondsmen, but Texas, 83% of all releases, or 83 to 86% of all releases in Texas are still through the private surety business.
Okay. Anyway, we hope I'll put your contact information in the show notes rather. And I urge people who are watching to go and check it out. And I guess that's it. We're going to wrap up this episode of The View from Here, Behind Enemy Lines, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Ken Good.
Thanks, sir. And Michael.